Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group Roundtable, and the next part of our discussion for today is going to be She Serves, She Matter, She Voices Coalition with partner Sistah Soldier. Now, today is Saturday, August 14th, 2021, and August, once again, is National Wellness Month. So take care of yourselves, investigate what it means to you to be healthy, and do those things, because this is National Wellness Month in the month of August. I am Sean Claiborne, Army National Guard veteran, and filling in for Cliff Kelly and also Dr. Damon Arnold. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. So we have a couple of guests on our show right now for this panel. This part is we have Wanda Petty, a.k.a. Sistah Soldier. Are you there with us?
I am. Hello.
Welcome. You are a U.S. Army veteran and president and CEO of SheVet Inspire. And we also have a person who I am very interested in talking to very much, Talia Lugacy, a writer, director, and film producer. To give you a little bit of background about Talia, she's a writer, director, and a film producer, but she's also a teacher at the Lang College of the New School. She co-wrote and directed the feature film Descent, starring Rosario Dawson, which premiered in competition at the Tribeca Film Festival and was released theatrically by Warner Independent. So now, you guys have some interesting things to talk about. And so, Wanda, do you want to introduce Talia and give us a little bit of background as well as to, because you brought her to America's Heroes Group, is that correct?
Yes, I did. So Talia is a phenomenal producer, and she's pretty much engaged herself into learning about veterans and has such a passion to really get the message across for those who are experiencing post-traumatic stress, as well as conveying the message of for those who are not who have not experienced it, doesn't know what it's like, for us to really get an understanding of what's going on and bringing the best of both communication leverage abilities to surface. And so I thought it was really vitally important because of so much that's going on today, and even right now with, what's been revealed in the last couple of days about the Iraq and Afghanistan and what's going over there, and they're not really that the Taliban has taken over, and soldiers and service members are wondering, well, what was the purpose of me going over there? Mm-hmm. And so with things like that surfacing, I know that there is other triggers that's being brought about, and what she's out to do is to really help us to be able to see a different side of that and ways to be able to not only manage it, but cope with it and change lives in the process of understanding what service members are experiencing.
I think that's great. Now, Talia, tell us about yourself a little bit more, and also can you explain, because I did kind of read up on your film that you produced a few years back, Descent. Tell us about that film, and also I'm curious to find out, because you're not a veteran yourself, you weren't in the military, is that correct?
That's right, yeah, Sean, I'm not.
And so what brought you, how did you connect, what made you get interested in veterans issues, particularly? Well, Go ahead.
No, I just it was just interesting to me that you brought up my first film, Descent, and in connection to your question you're asking me, which is how did I become interested in veterans issues? Well, these two things are actually connected because Descent is about trauma. It's about the aftermath of rape and the trauma that comes from that. And so really, this film, my current film, This Is Not a War Story, is another kind of consequence of my grappling with my own trauma in my life. I gravitated towards veterans issues for that reason. And then I found a community of veterans who were very supportive of me telling this story with them. And that's the film.
Okay. So you found an affinity with some of the things that you were dealing with, and then also tend to transpire through the films that you were creating today. Tell us about your new film. You kind of give us a hint about your new film that you're working on.
Sure, yeah. This Is Not a War Story is a narrative hybrid. So it's a fictional story that involves real veterans portraying themselves in the film, and a lot of improvisational dialogue. So anyone who's seen, I guess, Nomadland is the most recent example of that kind of filmmaking. And the story is really looking at the suicidal impulse, the consequence of trauma. It's looking at moral injury specifically as a cause of trauma, and how one goes about fathoming the experience that one had, and how do you cope with it and live with it. As Sistah was pointing out, returning veterans, Iraq, Afghanistan, and also from Vietnam, contending with the moral injury that comes with serving, and what one has to deal with internally just to be able to live. This is what the film is looking at.
And we talk about PTSD and we talk about sexual trauma that happens in the military. One thing that we have, there is a connection. We have to realize that we are now just getting that into our lexicon in the American public. So it's now just seems like we're just starting to really understand what PTSD really means, and it's not just a military phenomenon. It's actually something that if you have any kind of traumatic experience, especially a life and death experience, whether you're growing up in maybe a community that has a lot of violence or around a lot of poverty, which is not just the United States but around the world, or if you're in a situation where you are in a very unsafe, compromised position where you are raped or have experienced any kind of sexual trauma, these are things that we as American and as citizens need to grapple with and start having a conversation about. So I think it's great that you're making these movies because that topic and doing it in a way that's also tasteful, which is also, I think, very, very important. And so tell me your process as far as filmmaking, as far as the stories how you craft your stories as a writer. How do you where do you start, and then does each film have its own specific goal, or is it more of an exploration?
Well, sure. I mean, films have a goal. The goal evolves. But one thing unequivocally I can say is that I do as a starting point is that I try to craft films in such a way where I can self-generate my own material. In other words, I can be in creative control of what the film is going to be. I don't have to answer to a company who's funding an enormous amount of money. These are small films, and they're small on purpose so that I can have the leeway to tell a story that needs to be told in a certain way. There's one review or a few reviews of our film that have already come out have pointed to the fact that, our film, unlike every other Hollywood movie that deals with these issues in terms of the military, our film doesn't have, the blessing of the DOD and all this kind of thing. We're not going through those normal channels, and that's part of. So the making of the film, in that sense, is critical to what the film ends up becoming. And for this reason, we're able to offer the veterans who are in the film that much more loyalty to the fact that, yes, we're going to tell your story the way that you want it to be told, rather than some companies sort of skewing things to a hero narrative or these myths that I think Hollywood perpetuates that are quite damaging.
So that, and you kind of tipped off the time bomb with that response, because we don't think about it, but we know that happens. I mean, people have been in the military, watch certain films and things like that, and sometimes we get wrapped up in the drama and we get wrapped up in the story and the action and things like that. But there is a veil, so to speak, about what actually the real story is and what the story is being presented. So in that regard, can you elaborate a little bit on? And so if I'm Sean Claiborne, I want to make a movie about Iraq, and I want to use the military's face, so to speak, and put it and show what's going on in Iraq. What do I got to do? What types of hoops do I have to jump through in order to tell my story?
You got to send the DOD your script. They have to approve it. Oh yeah, there's a whole office tied to the Hollywood studio system where this all gets funneled through. And a lot of it, I mean, this is a really fun thing to read up on. All the differences that all the incarnations that popular movie scripts go through, because the DOD has a problem with this, that, or the other. But they need those approvals because obviously the enormity of what they're trying to shoot is so expensive and cumbersome and so specific to whatever war they're trying to capture. So but our film is more concerned about the behavior of the return, the return stateside, the kind of living with the war inside you. That's really what this film is concerned with. And again, in doing so, it manages to stay under the radar of any of those bigger companies that would need those kinds of approvals.
Okay. When you say stay under the radar, do you feel threatened, or you feel like there could be some kind of repercussions? Because what I see it as, if you're trying to make a Hollywood movie, and you need the DOD support or the DOD's blessing in order to get your sponsors, the people that give you the money. Making a movie is not cheap. is better than it was, 20, 30 years ago with the technology, because now you have digital cameras, you have, computer post-production, so you can do pretty much anything you want to do in post-production for the most part. I mean, we watched YouTube and the internet, and I'm seeing special effects, which aren't necessarily quite where they need to be, but you can do a lot of stuff today with the digital technology we have, and it's not as expensive as it used to be. But then what happens, though, if I go out and make, Saving Private Ryan Part 3 or whatever, and and then it makes the military look bad. Am I going to get in trouble?
I don't know. I mean, we'll find out. I mean, certainly, our film is interested in the kind of controversy that might get dug up by it. I think that's important to starting a conversation around these issues, but certainly it doesn't fit into a box, and if anything, like one of the scenes that it appears in This Is Not a War Story was the consequence of so many conversations I had with veterans over the couple of years that it took to make the film. Were like, they're film buffs like I am. It was really uncanny, and they've seen every war film and complained about most of them, and that's all in the dialogue of the film, which I think it's really a lot of fun, because they're taking stabs at Saving Private Ryan and Black Hawk Down and all these other things that are just really not capturing it, at least to the tune that there's an internal critique going on. Anyway, I'm on a tangent. So.
No, I think it's great because I agree, because a lot of times, and it's subtle, because a lot of times, from my experience, it's subtle in a lot of ways. Because even watching like a police story, like to listen to cops or police officers, many of which suffer from PTSD from the stuff that they see every day. Doctors, people that grow up in, like I said, impoverished communities where there's a lot of crime and violence. I mean, how do you think the person is supposed to respond if psychologically if they witness a friend getting killed or shot in the street, or a loved one or a close family member getting killed? I mean, that's a lot to grapple with, and then being in the confine of a war zone, when you have a friend you're talking to on 1 minute and next minute he's gone, or you have a person that's maybe has a disability that's permanent, maybe they lose their legs, maybe they're paraplegic. These are the types of things that people don't realize can break down not just the veteran, but the family and the people around that veteran that loves that person. So how do you address
that's the thing,
that?
I think that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one way is that what I realized making this film, which is not surprising at all, but that veterans have so much to teach us. I mean, as a culture, I mean, individually dealing with trauma, like the community that I found literally has taught me ways of coping with my own trauma, which was, part of the exercise, I think, of making the film. But one of the things that we capture in the film is this community of veterans who are artists who, they shred their uniforms, they make paper out of their uniforms, and on that paper they express all of the things that are unfathomable, turn it into art. And there's a community aspect to this that is just beautiful and down to earth and very tactile. Anyway, these are things that the things that day to day help you just live. Are the ways of coping with trauma. It's not, part of this film is very much a response also to my kind of disdain for the mainstream depiction of trauma where, somebody has a realization and at the end everything's fine. I mean, those kinds of narratives are such nonsense, and they really don't help anybody. At least in our film, we're looking very squarely at this suicidal impulse. We're looking at the fact that, it's a day after day after day showing up to do the work of healing. Healing isn't some big prize at the end of some ridiculous narrative that has some, swelling music and stuff. It's a daily process. And I think that should be encouraging. I hope that it is. It seems to be, with people who see the film.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, I think that's part, even in, I went to film school, for example, at Northwestern. So then when you're taught that there's got to be this moment, you're graded to follow the Hollywood narrative where there's got to be this moment where the character realizes that they have to change. And everything has to be, and that's what almost like what you get graded on.
Damaging.
So the person has to be. Yeah. You start out one with. I remember, it was interesting because Quentin Tarantino actually talked about this on another podcast, and he mentioned that during the 70s there was this period of time where there was a rebellion against that kind of idea where people oftentimes don't change. Sometimes the story actually is what happens to that individual, that character, going through the process of being who they are.
Yeah.
And also discovering who you really are. When everybody else can maybe see it ahead of you, but you coming to the realization of who you really are. To ask you a personal question, if I may, when you write or come up with these different types of scenarios or explorations in your storytelling, or do you ever get to a point where it becomes burdensome or overwhelming for you? Do you ever get to a point where you're like, where it affects you seriously, deeply to the core, and even maybe to the point where you find it difficult to even do that, to even go out and even explain that or express that?
Yes, but I have learned how to take a pause when I need to. I mean, this sounds stupid, but I've learned how to breathe.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that I'm writing is not always fun. It's writing is the most painful of all of the filmmaking disciplines and the most difficult. But, you know, it's also, at the end of the day, the most rewarding because you really are getting to the bottom of this thing you're wrestling with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very taxing, you know. But you still have to look out for yourself. I mean, nothing is worth, you know, putting yourself in harm's way. Just you find a balance. But really, it was for me a matter of showing up every single day for years to write. So I didn't know how to do it when I started.
Was it more like? So is this more like therapy, or is it more? Do you feel compelled?
No.
So this is my responsibility. I have to tell these stories because no one else is going to do it if I don't do it. Or is it somewhere?
It's a combination of that. It's much closer to the latter. I mean, really, it is just my own fascination with human beings and human behavior. And I don't know what the story is going to be necessarily when I start out, but I do have, you know, two figures in a room, two people in a space of some kind, and I listen to what they're saying and I watch how they move. And then a story sort of presents itself. I'm pulling on threads. I'm not grafting my ideas onto something. I'm pulling them out from, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So before we run out of time, where can people can see your films? What outlets or what platforms are they on where they can actually see?
Great. So so This Is Not a War Story is making the festival rounds at the moment. It's going to be playing in Los Angeles in a few weeks at the Dances with Films Film Festival, and we're working on a release right now, which should be out this fall. I can't say more than that at the moment, but you can definitely follow This Is Not a War Story on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. All those outlets will update us on how we can watch the film. Descent is not in circulation at the moment, but it may be coming back. So,
okay. Now what's that process like to get something in circulation? So why is it not? Why can't you find it on YouTube?
It's a long series of banalities.
Oh, wow.
It's you know, there's a whole side of filmmaking that they don't teach you at film school, whether it's Northwestern or anywhere else. They don't tell you about all the paperwork and all that drudgery that goes with it. You know, so you better love the hell out of it. That's what I tell my students.
I can believe it. Is money part of the equation? So if say the movie had some kind of commercial backing or sponsorship or something like that, if there was a Coca-Cola can in the beginning of the movie or something like that, would that make a difference? As far as getting distribution and getting out to platforms?
No, not really. I mean, it might make a difference in terms of, you're talking about product placement. I mean, that may make a difference in terms of raising money for the film. But again, if you have a sponsor on board, they have a set of approvals, right? Okay. I don't think Coca-Cola would be very happy with a lot of the things that we're saying in the film. And a lot of other companies they're so entrenched in corporate, you know, stuff that they can't get behind things that are a little bit more radical. And I think that that's to be expected. So again, what I do in response to that is I keep the costs as manageable as I can so that, you know, at the end of the day, I'm responsible. Myself and my team are responsible for the film, but it's small. Mm-hmm. And as you were saying, technology has advanced to such a degree that, like, we really can tell many stories without the support of enormous financial institutions and studios and whatnot. It really is possible now. So the thing to spend your time on if you're trying to make films is the writing part, really the craft. If you get good at that, then the technology part is easy. Mm-hmm. You know?
So how do we get to the distribution phase? What's the distribution part of that equation? Can you go on YouTube, put your stuff on YouTube, or just make a website and then try to get social media to kind of pick up on it? Is that something is that realistic?
It really depends on what the story is. It really depends on what this thing is that you're referring to. Every single film has its own path. But, you know, I'm not going to lie, the situation for independent films pretty grim. I mean, there's more platforms than there ever have been before, but there is also a lot of pitfalls, and you know, all you have to do is turn on Netflix to just see the enormity of content and how good is most of it. I mean, it's hard to navigate all of these things. I think that the important thing is to just stay true to what you're trying to do, and then you follow through with it, and you just take the path wherever it goes. But you can't really function too much with that level of goal in mind. Just make the film, you know.
Now, how did you get Rosario Dawson in your first film? How did that work out?
Well, we go back a ways. We went, to the Strasbourg Theater School together when we were kids, and we always had this, this dream that we would be making films together, and so we are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. You really shed a lot of light on the filmmaking process, but also too, I really appreciate your dedication and your drive to actually tell veteran stories and tell them truthfully. I think that's something, once again, is really, really missing in media in general, especially in mass media. So that, I tip my hat to you. Yeah. And I think you got to do the good work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that.
All right, Sister Soldier, still with us?
Yeah, I am. What an awesome conversation.
That's what we try to do. So do you have anything for us to let us know about? So what's going on in your world nowadays?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to reiterate what she was saying. It's just such a great coping skill to be able to write, to be able to creatively express ourselves as service members and as human beings. But I believe that this is what the art of movie making and filmmaking and writing does. It actually allows one to be able to express themselves and take those internal feelings and contribute them in a positive way. And so it's so important. I love how Talia said to take the time to write the story, because that's what it's about. And that's what we work with here at SheVet Media for women veterans, to write their stories so that they can get it out and be able to live sustainable and fulfilled lives.
Okay, and give us a website for that.
They can go to sistersoldier.com and learn about the story workshops that we have, as well as the recruitment and the internship that we provide.
I really appreciate that. Thanks once again for Ms. Lugacy and also Sister Soldier. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right. Have a great day.
All
Bye
right.
for now.
I will be back.